Okay, now that we've caught up a little bit on what was statistic parameter, population, sample, all that stuff, and also remind ourselves about sampling error. Sampling error comes from the fact that your sample's never a perfect reflection of the whole population. There's always a bit of the population you can't capture with a sample because you're taking a sample, because it's smaller, because it doesn't capture everybody. So now we've done that, we need to talk about bias. Ways that you can bias your sample, bias your results. So when you bias something, it means that you're going to be tending to produce untrue values. Now there are three main sources of bias that we're going to talk about. There's sampling bias, non-response bias, and response bias. So the first one we have is sampling bias. Okay, so sampling bias is when you take a sample that is not representative of the population. So there are a couple main ways we can talk about this. We can talk about convenient samples. That's when you only sample people that are convenient to you. American Idol does this, right? And Dancing with the Stars does this. So those are shows where people call in to say who they want to vote for, but that is inherently biased towards the people that care and all of that stuff. Then you could have an incomplete frame or undercoverage. Let's say you want to, ask people's opinions about, I don't know, same-sex marriage, but you somehow only ask people that are Christian conservatives or something. And then that means you're not asking all the other people their opinions, right? So you're biasing yourself by having an undercoverage of other people, right? The same is true the other way too. What if you only poll liberal people and you don't poll any Christian conservatives? That's not good either. I mean, the whole idea is you want to have it so that you've covered every possible group evenly, or as evenly as you can. You also The other way to think about that is that you have an incomplete frame. If you had a list of everybody possible, you're missing some. It's not complete. A really simple example of that would be like, let's suppose you want to poll all JCC students, but somehow you accidentally leave all the Hillsdale students off. Well, if they're off the list, then that's an incomplete frame. The frame is the list of all the students and their phone numbers. And if you leave off all the Hillsdale students, that's incomplete, right? And therefore, they're never going to get asked. And that's not asking the people of Hillsdale what they think about whatever. All right, then you could have non-response bias. Non-response bias is when you try to get a hold of people and they won't answer, or they pick up the phone, find out you're a surveyor, and they hang up on you. Or you get these at the restaurants. So at restaurants and at Sears and other stores, they'll give you your receipt and they'll say, "Hey, fill out this survey," right? And they want you to respond. They don't want non-response. So what they'll do is they'll try to give you some incentives. That's happened to me sometimes. Like, fill out the survey and you could win a calculator, or fill out the survey and you could win a $50 gift certificate, or whatever. They're trying to control non-response. They're trying to give people a reason to respond. And sometimes they'll just pester you. They'll keep calling and calling and calling to try to get you to answer. There's always going to be some non-response, because you're always going to get some people that just are not going to answer. But you want to try to minimize it. You want to make it as small as you can. All right, the next thing you're going to have is response bias. And there's a whole gamut of these. So this is when the answers on the survey do not reflect the true feelings of the respondent. There are a lot of ways this can happen. One, you could have interviewer error, meaning you've picked a bad interviewer. The interviewer doesn't know what they're doing. They read off the script. They're untrustworthy. So you get this a lot with parents and kids. They'll be like, "Well, I asked my child if they were doing drugs and they said no, and I believed them." Well, they were never going to tell you the truth because you are untrustworthy to them. They don't want to get in trouble, so they're not going to be honest, right? We have that sometimes with schools. Like, we polled our students about whether they were doing drugs and they're not, or whatever. I pick drugs, but pick a habit that you do not want teenagers to pick up, and you can get this, right? So the interviewer can't be trusted with the information. You're not going to tell them the truth, etc. And that leads often to the second one, which is some survey questions result in responses that misrepresent facts or are flat out lies. People just won't tell you the truth because they don't trust you or whatever. And sometimes they ask you questions you just don't know the answer to, so you just make stuff up, right? That's particularly problematic if you don't have a way to just say, "I don't know," right? If you have questions or survey questions that always make you respond, but you don't know the answer, you'll just make stuff up. Then you could bias yourself in the way you word the questions. So the questions are written in a leading way. So you think gun control rights should be limited, don't you? Stuff like that. So putting it in a very loaded language. pun intended. All right, so then ordering of questions or words. So the way you order them, by asking first questions about one thing that kind of make you think negatively, and then you lead to another thing, right? So you can bias yourself that way. Then the type of question. If a question is closed, like I was saying earlier, suppose you want to give a different response. You want to kind of say, I don't know, or whatever, but they don't give you that option. They don't give you the option of backing out. Or let's say you want to give a full response with like an essay, but they don't give you space for that kind of thing. And then last but not least, pretty simple, somebody messes up and types wrong what you said. So you said 33%, but they typed 333%, that sort of thing. All right, one last comment I want to make, which is sampling error and sampling bias. They sound very similar, but they are two totally different things. Sampling error comes from the fact that different results will come from different samples. So every sample you take is going to be a little bit different, and none of them are going to be perfect mirrors of the population. It's nothing you're doing wrong. It's just the fact that a sample is a sample. And because of that, it's never going to fully represent the whole population. It's always going to be a little bit off. That's sampling error. So the word error is kind of weird because it doesn't really mean you've done anything wrong. It's not a mistake. You can't get rid of sampling error, but you can try to lessen it by taking a good, unbiased, random sample of a large size. We'll talk about how large a size later on in chapter 9, but large enough, let's just put it that way. Sampling bias, however, means you've done something wrong. There is a flaw in how you are collecting this data. You're biasing it. You're just doing convenience. You're asking worded questions or loaded questions. You've made some mistakes. And that means that everything that you build off of that, all the numbers that you gather, are garbage, right? You can't draw any conclusions from them whatsoever. I don't care if it's 10,000 people you're polling. If you did it in a really biased way, it doesn't matter. That's exactly what happens with Dancing with the Stars and American Idol. They get 10,000 people calling in, but it's irrelevant because it's only biased towards, well, it's a convenient sample. It's only the people that care enough to call and are willing to pay whatever fee it is to call and cast a vote. That is tremendously biased. And that's okay because they're not trying to do a statistical survey, but that would not be the way we would want to conduct a survey for who are you going to vote for in the next presidential election. Call in and pay $1 to play. No, we don't want that, right? So sampling bias means that you've collected it in such a terrible way that it's not valid statistically. And again, for American Idol, it doesn't really matter. They don't care whether it's valid statistically, but for our purposes, we do care. All right, so suppose JCC wants to poll students about salary negotiations for professors. For each, identify the bias. So choose the best answer from the list. Okay, so the person making the phone calls reads the script incorrectly. So they're supposed to ask the question a particular way, and they go off script. Well, that would be an interviewer error for sure. Okay, the person typing in the answers accidentally types that a student wants professors to have a 25% pay raise. Boy, that'd be nice. Instead of a 2.5% pay raise. That is a data entry error. They have messed up. All right, JCC gets the names and phone numbers for only students in the fall semester. Okay, well, that's not fair. If you only do the fall semester, you're missing all the winter students and all the spring summer students. So you have an incomplete frame. You're missing out on a whole group of students that might be fundamentally different from the fall students, right? You're not having the full list of students. The possible pay raise levels start always with a higher number. So students reply that one as it was first in the list. Okay, so students reply with the one that was always first in the list. Sorry about that. Okay, so this happens all the time. What happens psychologically is that if you hear a list of numbers, so I could say, what do you think about instructor pay rate? Should it be 4%, 3%, 2%, 1%, 0%? People tend psychologically to pick the first number that they heard. It's like your brain hooks into that number, and that's what you think of. You do it with words as well. So hold on, this is order. You're messing up the order of the words that you're giving them. So if you look into the Gallup polls that they do for like presidential campaigns, like the last one was Obama versus Romney, what they'll do is they'll call up and they'll say to the first person, who are you going to vote for, Romney or Obama? And the next person, they'll say, who are you going to vote for, Obama or Romney? They'll flip-flop it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth all the time. And the reason they do that is because they don't want to bias it. People tend to pick the first name or whatever that they hear. So they want to flip-flop back and forth so that they don't have that problem. So that's an order of questions, right? Or it's technically ordering of the words, right? The way that they've got the order will always, people tend to pick the first one first. They'll do that on ballots as well, by the way, for voting. So if you have multiple people voting, sometimes they'll flip-flop them depending on what state you're in. California does it, I know. All right, so students are called, but hundreds of them won't answer the phone. Well, that could totally happen, but that would be a non-response bias, right? People are not responding to you. A professor gives the students a survey about their feelings about his class, but only asks multiple choice questions and doesn't ask for further comments. Well, that's a type of questions problem, right? I've had this happen to me, and I got so frustrated. So I had a professor I really wanted to give a lot of constructive feedback to, but I couldn't because all they gave me was a multiple choice thing. Drove me crazy. All right, students say that what they think the interviewer wants to hear, but they don't really believe it. So that's lying, right? You're lying to save face. You're lying to, right? That's misrepresenting your answers. That tends to happen a lot when it's something you, when you're with an interviewer you don't trust, or if it's something that's kind of scary to admit to, right? You're kind of embarrassed by it or whatever, so you'll lie. For example, a lot of people claim to give to charity a lot more than actually do give to charity. So they are saying that they give to charity, but they actually don't. A lot of voting, people claim to vote that don't actually vote either. All right, the question put to students asks, you think professors are overpaid, right? Well, that's biased, right? It's biased in how you're writing it. So the wording of the question itself, the way they worded it was leading towards agreeing that, yes, professors are overpaid, right? All right, the dean of students walks over to CV1, which is one of the dorms on campus, and asks every student they can find what they think about instructor pay and benefits. Well, that would be a convenient sample, and not a very good one at that, right? Because they're just grabbing whoever they catch in the hallways of the dorm. Okay, so that's very biased towards people that live in the dorm, right, and not anybody else. And those people might be fundamentally different than the rest. All right, a survey is emailed to all JC students, but only 3% respond. That's another non-response bias. You're running into issues with people not answering you. The president of the college conducts one-on-one interviews of students in his office. Oh, that would be intimidating, right? You don't want to tell him anything he doesn't want to hear. So that would be interviewer error. You don't trust that interviewer. It's an untrustworthy interviewer. Okay? You're too intimidated to tell the truth. And then a survey sent out by administration asks you to list any issues you have with instructors on campus. And then the next question asks you about raises for professors. So they'd be sending you a survey saying, so tell us all the troubles you've had. Tell us everything, and then, so it gets you in that negative mindset, and then it asks you about raises. So you're going to stay being negative. So that's the order of the questions again, right? They're ordering the questions up to get a particular response that's negative. All right, we are all done with section 1.5. See ya.